right? Synergy means there's value on both sides. Does everyone get that? There's value on both sides. We actually inhabit each other's value. We listen to each other. We use mechanisms of technology to create synergy. And synergy means a whole greater than the sum of the parts. All right, we talked last week about democracy. Now, democracy is wildly important. And democracy is failing us. And as Barbara will say today in her sermon, and as I've said, many times over the last years, but that doesn't mean that we move beyond democracy. It doesn't mean that we don't vote. It means that we vote at a whole level of consciousness. It means that we re-understand what voting is. It means that we stand for an evolution of democracy. And I want to understand this very well. Democracy itself, writes Abraham Cook, one of the great evolutionary mystics of the 20th century, democracy itself is a quality of revelation. And the founding fathers of the United States, right, and of many of the democracies in Western Europe and around the world, and we said last week we need the founding fathers and the founding mothers. The founding fathers understood democracy to be part of the unfolding of spirit itself. And Cook actually writes that democracy itself is a structure of the new revelation. And that's how we understand democracy. Democracy is not just a social construction of reality. Democracy is an evolutionary unfolding of the source code of love itself. That's one. And two, what that means is that democracy itself has to evolve. We need to actually, and why? And so I want to very, very briefly touch on, 7 or 8 points and then turn to Barbara so we kind of understand what's failing with democracy. Why does democracy, as envisioned by the founding fathers, not work anymore? It's literally not working. And why do we need to take the next step? So our code, right? Democracy as it functions today is not working. We need an evolution of democracy. We need to include and transcend into the next stage. The evolution of democracy is the evolution of love, which is the evolution of God, right? If democracy is a thought form in the mind of God, right? And the mind of God is the infinite creativity and value that animates reality, then the evolution of that mind form is the evolution of democracy. We take democracy seriously. It's time to write the next chapter in democracy. It's time to walk the next step in the evolution of love, which is what Barbara and I want to call together synergistic democracy. Okay, so I want to briefly talk about how we got here and then turn to Barbara. So 1, okay, here we go. Ready to go, everyone? Here's 1. And maybe we'll find this in the chat box together. 1. And we talked about 3 of these next week. I want to recapitulate them here. Number 1, most of the issues today that we vote on, we have no idea what they mean. Right? We call that, the name for that is hyperobjects. And hyperobjects means, for example, those of you who are in Great Britain, I know, Jacqueline, you're in Great Britain. Richard Dawkins, the great evolutionary biologist, right, said that when he voted on Brexit, he had no reason, right, to be voting because the implications of Brexit in terms of currency or not currency, in terms of economics, in terms of social policy, were completely beyond his understanding. And he's a complex thinker. But the nature of the issues, should Great Britain leave the European Union or not, which was the Brexit issue that was voted on in a referendum, and the referendum was hijacked by lowest common denominator propaganda campaigns. So Dawkins says, why am I voting on this? That's true about virtually every issue, whether it's gain of function research, whether it's issues revolving core economic policy, whether it's the implications of healthcare and how healthcare should function in terms of, right, its economics, right? The issues are so complex, the world economy is so complex, right? That in order to actually vote on something, you need so much information. You have to consider carefully both sides. You have to integrate that information across such a broad spectrum of issues that actually it's virtually impossible to intelligently vote. So that's a huge challenge. And we need to address that. And there's possibilities and proposals on the table of how we can actually up level. But so the first requirement is we need to actually engage the issues and up level how we are citizens of a democracy, which is why, as we said last week, Benjamin Franklin said, right, we've got a republic here if you can keep it. And it's why George Washington said that the science of democracy is an informed and educated citizenry. We don't have that today. We have a polarized space in which voting is an act of war. That's one. Voting is a function of win-lose democracy. Win-lose democracy is a function of the win-lose metrics, which is the reigning story on planet Earth today. Rivalrous conflict, success story, governed by win-lose metrics. And 6-7 years ago, I was privileged to initiate a conference called Success 3.0 with my dear friend John Mackey and other colleagues. John's the chair of Whole Foods, where we discussed this win-lose metrics tragedy of Success 2.0. And we talked about moving towards a synergistic vision of success. We called it Success 3.0. So we need to apply that to democracy. That's one. Two, the key issues that actually matter aren't voted on. So more than anything in the future, the nature of artificial intelligence that replaces jobs as companies blindly move, pushing automation, not understanding the implications, right? The nature of robotics, the nature of nanotech, the nature of infotech, the nature of biotech, all of those dramatically affect our future. None of those are voted on in democracy. All of them begin, right, in entrepreneurial win-lose metrics driven by quarterly profits. That's where those decisions are being made. None of them are being voted on. No one here is voting on machine intelligence. Virtually no one here understands machine intelligence, right? The algorithms are infinitely complex. You need algorithms to understand the algorithms. So the key issues that actually affect our future are not being voted on. 2, 3, all the issues that affect the essential existential and catastrophic risks, right, which define the future of our children and grandchildren, are international. They're not local. They require global coordination. But you can't globally coordinate through local democracies that are fighting with each other in the win-lose metrics between states. So it's not to say we shouldn't have democracies. It just means that the democracy structure of nation states as they exist today are literally obsolete in terms of meeting the challenges. So that's international, not local. Number 4, the nature of voting itself has become preposterous. It's an open secret in Facebook that Facebook, through split testing and through campaigns, can actually affect the result of an election. 2011, Facebook did a campaign to 61 million voters, and they were able to, through sharing faces of Facebook friends who had voted, to affect the voting pattern directly beyond the awareness of those people who are being affected in key districts. Now, for example, Alex Pentland at the MIT Media Lab reports this Facebook experiment in his book, Social Physics, as a grand success. He's ecstatic about it. Shoshana Zuboff, in her book, Surveillance Capitalism, reports this same Facebook experiment, right, as the death of democracy, or the potential, death of democracy. Right? You understand how 2 responsible reporters are seeing something completely different. And Pentland is correct in terms of the efficacious nature, right, of the technological grid in causing action. That's what he's ecstatic about. He doesn't understand what Zuboff correctly understands, the implications. The implications are that you can actually use micro-targeting, right, of undecided voters through split testing beyond. Split testing means you carefully test how you sequence, right, a number of ads and images and songs in a particular way, or whatever the particular sequence is, in order to cause a statistically significant result among a particular pool of the population. So Facebook, Google, and other platforms have the ability to do that beyond the realm of the awareness of the voter. And in terms of the individual voter, that has relatively little impact. But in terms of statistics, in other words, percentage points, you actually swing any election. And no one's aware that you did it, right? So we actually have technologies at play that have the capacity to undermine the very structures of democracy. And as a number of key writers have pointed out, they've been deployed around the world in democracies to actually affect democracy directly. That's a big deal. Does everyone get that? No one's even aware that's happening. That's number 4. Okay. Now here's the thing. Number 5. And it's number 5 and 6 that we want to focus on. Number 5 is that the structure of democracy itself is win-lose. And the structure of democracy itself is, right, there's a problem, okay, there's a challenge, okay, the problem needs to be solved. One group of people, right, has enough power to formulate, let's say a referendum, to formulate a law. That law favors one set of values. That law favors one set of people. That group of people then uses all of their power available in order to pass their law. So let's say that group of people, let's just take the United States as an example. The United States is split pretty much 50-50 between 2 large blocks. So if one block wins, that means the entire other block has been defeated. And voting becomes a win-lose form of aggression. Right? Does everyone get that? It's a win-lose democracy, and you've got to win every 4 years. So you can't do any long-term planning when every problem requires, every challenge, which is existential and catastrophic, right, engendering those kinds of risks, require long-term planning. Wow. Democracy doesn't have the ability today in its current form to do that long-term planning because it's always involved in a win-lose metrics. Every congressperson and every senator, every state representative all needs financing, right? All is in a continuous win-lose game, right? And we create radical polarization, which destroys the basic movement of evolution, which is synergy, right? Synergy means there's value on both sides. Does everyone get that? There's value on both sides. We actually inhabit each other's value. We listen to each other. We use mechanisms of technology to create synergy. And synergy means a whole greater than the sum of the parts. There's a greater whole in America, greater than Republicans and greater than Democrats, greater than left and greater than right, greater than interest groups, greater than lobbyists. We need to actually inhabit the value on each side of polarities and come to the higher integration. We called that here a number of months ago. We called that, anyone remember? She comes in threes. And she comes in threes means there's always a polarity, a synthesis and antithesis, right? Excuse me, a thesis and an antithesis. Hegel talked about a thesis and an antithesis, right? A polarity. And then that thesis and antithesis, if you have good information, if you inhabit each other's values, if you inhabit each other's perspectives, you synergize, right, at a higher level of consciousness. So we need structures of voting in which we vote, but in new ways, right, which actually were informed. And maybe we have representatives who vote for us on issues that we don't understand, right? Maybe we require actually responsibilities in order to exercise the rights and we need to be informed on issues. Maybe we have to have conferences, right, all over the country, new town halls online and in person, where we actually dialogue directly and listen deeply and inhabit each other's perspective and values, right, and then create together proposals for synergy. But however we do this, right, and there are real suggestions on the table and important work being done in Taiwan and important work being done in Estonia, right, we actually need to evolve democracy itself. We need synergistic democracy, which is the evolution of love, which is the evolution of democracy. Now, here's the last piece, okay? And this is number 6, and I'm going to turn to Barbara. You can only get to synergistic democracy if we have a shared grammar of evolving value. That's critical. When I say a shared grammar of value, I mean, right, we have a shared understanding of the good, the true, and the beautiful. A shared understanding of what it means to be a human being, not in a dogmatic way, not in a way that eliminates diversity, not in a way which is totalitarian, but that we're all part of the same musical score and each playing our own unique instrument in that score. So we become what we call a unique self-symphony, and every religion's a unique self, and every country, every nation state's a unique self, and every region of the world's a unique self, and every race is a unique self, and every populace is a unique self, right? And every thought form is a unique self, and every, right, school of psychology is a unique self. We need all the unique selves, but we need to be playing, right, the same music. We need to be part of a universal grammar of value. That value is evolving. It's not owned by any one system, but it's only if we have a shared story, right? A shared global story, which creates global intimacy, that we can actually create shared sense making that enacts global coherence. So you can't have synergistic democracy unless within every democracy, there's a shared story of value that's intrinsic to reality, right? That value is evolving, right? It's always taking in new information. It's always widening its field, but it is value. It's intrinsic. We're in the Tao. When we're in the Tao, when we're in value, we can hold paradox. We can hold polarity. We don't divide over paradox, right? We don't divide over contradiction. We don't pick up one value and say, this is my value and your value is wrong. We hold, when you're in the Tao, when you're in the shared story of value, when you understand that we're part of a seamless code of the universe, interior and exterior, and that all values are expressions of the larger eros of cosmos, then we can inhabit each other's value. Then we don't polarize. Then actually we can hold paradox. We can synergize. That's synergistic democracy. Right? Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord, the next stage in the evolution of love, and might turn the word with great joy to you, Barbara Marx Hubbard.
So mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. I have been considering here for synergistic democracy to just start into what it means to have a democracy at all. To think of what it was like before we had democracy. People lived like serfs. People had no name. The monarchy could boil somebody in oil to see who was right and who was wrong. It wasn't even considered that every individual would have life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the right to vote. So to take a deep prayer of thankfulness for the pioneers that liberated democracy to begin with in the United States, in England, and how great that period has been of liberating individual creativity and potential. And here we reside now in the midst of the first evolutionary church on earth, recognizing that the structure of win-lose democracy through voting, great as it was for its time, cannot coordinate us toward a planetary sense of connectivity, wholeness, oneness, and liberate the creativity of ourselves when we join. We've hit a structural impasse because the win-lose structure in all existing liberal democracies is not working. In the United States of America, it has shown up to be the divided states of America in order for one side to win over the other. Meanwhile, I'm just taking this, Mark, for right now as an announcement that the evolutionary church is a seedbed for evolutionary democracy. The seedbed is a church that is growing in the consciousness of the people founding this church. And if the Black Gospel Church made it possible for Martin Luther King to speak, "I have a dream."
Yes.
And his dream was so great and so clear that it was realized.
Yes. Amen.
In the particular frequency that you have set for this church, that we are the first church to announce the origin and fulfillment and dedication to synergistic democracy.
Amen. And
what is synergistic democracy being announced by the first evolutionary church, whose text is the sacred story of evolution?
Amen.
Allurement, quark to quark to quark, all the way on up to single cells, to multicells, to animals, to humans, to humanity, to us in this sacred church. So let everybody feel for the moment the awesome generation of capacity that we have, because Martin Luther King wasn't given this gift by being given a kingdom. He took it by his love. And here is the essence of synergistic democracy, built on the win-lose voting structures that gave us the first idea of individual freedom. Synergistic democracy starts with the phrase, I want to create. This is what I want to create. This is what is my unique passion to express, to give, to become. I want to create. Second thing that we say in synergistic democracy is, what do I need to create this better than I could do alone? Here we're going to be in synergistic democracy. I and each person on this call now, and each person listening, and every member of the Evolutionary Church and Evolutionary Democracy will think, this is what I most want to create, whatever it is, my unique self, yearning to create it. Second is, what do I most need to help me create it? Vocationally, Marx said he needed me to help him create the church because he has a passion to create this church. You think of, what do I most need to create it? And the third thing that we say in synergistic democracy is, what do I most want to give freely to everyone? Because I love to give it. Do I want to give my music? Do I want to give my healing? Do I want to give my humor? Do I want to give my love to caring for children? Whatever it is, I want to give it freely. Now imagine for a moment the new structure of synergistic democracy is a wheel of co-creation. Democracy, as every other human endeavor, has a structure upon which it is built. The parliamentary procedure is the structure upon which win-lose democracy is built. Synergistic democracy is built on something that we're all beginning to do called rules of synergistic order. What are those rules? They are that when I say I'm yearning to create something, and this is what I need, instead of somebody voting that they don't think what I wanted to create is any good, somebody in the evolutionary democracy is going to come to me and say, I have a creative input to help you create what you want to create. And by me joining vocationally with you within synergistic democracy, I am going to get to be more of who I am. In other words, we cultivate vocational arousal in the synergistic democracy of people choosing what they want to create, saying what they need to create it, having others join them to create it. And let's say you have entered in the wheel of co-creation into the field of health, and you have a new healing process that you would like to have known. But in order to do that, you might say, I need media attention to what I want to offer. Is there somebody in the media section of the wheel who has what I need in order to help me create it? That person is going to say yes, and you will have a vocational connection. You will experience joining of genius to create, because the person that's helping you will also need you to help them get what they want, and we start to cultivate social synergy, coming together to co-create. It's a very natural tendency. Actually, win-lose voting is not as natural as joining together to co-create. We had to go through win-lose democracy so that each individual could feel, I am significant. We've come to the end of your ability to be significant as an individual, winning or losing alone. So in our Mark, in sponsoring the evolution of synergistic democracy through the Evolutionary Church, which is dedicated to the politics of evolutionary love, which is following the great story of evolution as a love story, there is an incredible coherence here. And I'm going to declare that today, it's the first time that I have personally felt that we could collectively demonstrate synergistic democracy within the members of this church. We could call for it within our communities. We could hold small gatherings. We call them syncons for synergistic convergence. We can have wheel-like gatherings in the back of churches and in small universities, anywhere we want to connect people to co-create. So within this domain of the evolutionary church, we are announcing the development of the next stage of democracy, a politics of love. We are going to be calling on the genius of the noosphere and all these young tech guys that are doing it. And finally, we're going to be calling on the Office for the Future, which holds the wheel of co-creation within it and which carries us through right to the United Nations of this world.
This is a huge vision that Barbara and I articulated together. And it requires what we called in one of the first churches, the first One Mountain gatherings, a politics of evolutionary love. Right? Barbara created what was called the Wheel of Co-Creation 1.0, which she referred to in her talk. Right before Barbara died, I drafted together with Barbara at a restaurant in Portland, and we enacted it, the Wheel of Co-Creation 2.0, based on the universal love story and based on this notion, right, of the amorous cosmos and the unique impulse of evolutionary love that lives in us as a citizen. We're going to be bringing that together and bringing this vision of democracy into the world. And as Barbara said beautifully, right, the place of this evolutionary communion is to birth the next stage of democracy.